Chapter 1. The inciting incidente ought to state at once that I have never before witnessed a more arresting scene than that which greeted Hercule Poirot and myself. Upon our arrival at the Green Velvet Theatre on the evening of April 12, 1925, the grand old playhouse, crimson and gold in its faded opulence, sat shrouded in an uneasy hush, as though the very walls trembled with unwelcome news. We had been summoned by a frantic telegram from Mr. Samuel Faraday, the theatre's proprietor, whose terse missive spoke only of a most dreadful affair, immediate assistance required. Naturally, Poirot's curiosity was instantly piqued, and mine was stirred as well, though I must confess the first approached the matter with rather less enthusiasm than my little friend. Upon entering the foyer, our footsteps echoed across the marble floor. The chandelier overhead swung ever so slightly, its crystals tinkling like the last notes of a forgotten tune. Poirot paused to survey the scene, his little grey cells already at work. "Mon cher Hastings," he murmured, "observe the dampness. Upon the carpet, rain, certainly. But notice how it is more concentrated near the stage door than at the entrance. Someone entered or exited in haste." I followed his gaze. Indeed, the crimson carpet burdock, glistening footprints smudged and uneven, suggesting urgency rather than a leisurely stroll. Before I could voice my impression, a voice rang out from the dais at the back of the hall. "Detective, Monsieur Poirot, Samuel Faraday." His evening coat, dishevelled and askew, descended the steps like a man half distracted by fear. He was a tall, gaunt figure, spectacles perched at the end of his nose, and eyes wide with a mixture of relief and dread. At his side stood Inspector Mary of Scotland Yard, stern-faced and tapping his notebook. "Mr. Faraday." "Inspector." Poirot greeted with a courteous bow. "Pray tell us what has occurred." Faraday swallowed audibly. "It's Miss Adelaide Winterbourne, Monsieur, our leading lady. You know her reputation, the jewel of London's stage. She was to appear at tonight's opening of The Mirror of Lies. Yet," his voice broke. "Yes," Poirot inquired, steepling his fingers. "She's dead," Faraday whispered. "Found in a dressing-room." A cold shiver ran down my spine. In all my years with Poirot, I had seldom encountered such a grim summons. Yet, as always, I was drawn inexorably into the vortex of the mystery. Inspector Mary cleared his throat. "The body was discovered half an hour ago by the dresser, Miss Larkin. No sign of forced entry. The door was locked from the inside. We had to break the lock to gain access." Poirot's keen eyes flicked to the inspector. "Locked from the inside, you say, and no other exits?" "No other exits." Mallory flipped through his notebook. "Windows barred. No trapdoors as far as we can tell. A classic locked room scenario. Locked room murders were, of course. Precisely the sort of puzzle that set Poirot's little grey cells whirring with delight. I, on the other hand, felt only dread at the methodical cruelty implied at Poirot's invitation. Faraday led the way through a narrow corridor to the actress's private sanctum. The theatre's corridors were suffused with the odor of stale velvet and dusty perfume of history. But now, tainted by tragedy, we found ourselves before a heavy oak door, its brass plate engraved with Miss Adelaide Winterbourne. Poirot immediately knelt to examine the lock, then stood and pressed his ear gently to the wood. "Hear you nothing?" "Hastings." I listened. Only the faint hum of the theatre's heating system. The only other sound was, cruelly, the steady drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere beyond the wall. Poirot opened the door with the key the police had produced. The dressing-room was a modest, well-appointed chamber, all gilt mirrors and delicate chaise lounges. A small writing desk bore unopened letters and a half-finished cup of tea, cooling on a silver tray. But it was the figure on the floor that held our attention. Adelaide Winterbourne lay supine, Her exquisite gown spread like crimson blood upon the carpet. Her face, framed by open waves of hair, was serene yet lifeless, as though she slept deeply. But her right hand clutched a porcelain letter-opener, its blade buried to the hilt in heart. A single pearl earring had rolled away, resting as if it had fled in alarm. Porritt crouched beside her, eyes narrowed. "Monsieur Faraday, when was Miss Winterbourne last seen alive?" "Just before the curtain rose," Faraday answered, voice trembling. "She finished her prelude, went to change for the next scene, and that was the last we saw. And the dresser, Miss Larkin, when did she arrive?" "Miss Larkin knocked at the door at 7:02, Inspector Murray said. No response. She waited 5 minutes, then notified the stage manager. Porritt rose, facing us with a thoughtful expression. So the murder must have occurred between 6:50 and 7:02. The audience was in place, the orchestra already struck. The first chords of the overture. He turned to me, his eyes sparkling with the thrill of the hunt. "Hastings, there are questions aplenty. How did the murderer gain access? What became of the other suspects? And most perplexing of all, why leave the letter-opener in such a conspicuous manner?" As I looked round the room, I realized that every surface bore traces of someone's touch. A smudge on the mirror, a chair slightly ajar, a window latch that seemed ever so slightly loose. Each detail whispered of concealed truths waiting to be unearthed. Porritt, unperturbed by the macabre tableau, allowed his gaze to linger on the pearl earring by her side. But questions are one thing, Hastings, and answers quite another. Our work begins now. He tapped the floor lightly with his cane. "First, let us speak with Miss Larkin, and then, Hastings, we shall convene the entire company. Every actor, every stagehand, every soul present tonight must recount their movements. For in the theatre, as in life, illusions abound, and it is my task to discern reality from the mask. I steeled myself for the long night ahead. In that moment, I understood that this was no ordinary crime. The play had only just begun, and already the final curtain threatened to fall too soon. Chapter 2. The first clue as he followed Porritt through the dimly lit corridors of the Green Velvet Theatre. My heart still heavy from the sight of poor Adelaide. Winterbourne's lifeless form. The corridors, hung with red damask and gilded sconces, seemed to close in upon us, as though the very building mourned its fallen star. Porritt led the way with deliberate poise, his keen gaze sweeping every surface, every shadow. We first retraced the steps of Miss Larkin, the dresser who discovered the body. Porritt motioned to the damp footprints on the carpet. "Notice, Hastings, how she paused by this bronze statuette before hastening on. Yet the statuette itself retains no trace of moisture." Our dresser wiped away any evidence with surprising thoroughness. He tapped the statuette's polished base, a conscience at work, perhaps. Miss Larkin awaited us in Mr. Faraday's private office, her eyes red-rimmed and voice quavering. She hugged her shawl as if it offered protection. I introduced myself and Porritt, then allowed him to take the lead. He offered her a reassuring nod before speaking. "Mademoiselle, you are most distressed. Pray, recount your actions upon discovering Miss Winterbourne." Miss Larkin swallowed. "I arrived at her dressing-room at precisely 7:02. I knocked, softly at first. When no answer came, I waited. Then I found the door locked. I knocked again. Louder, still nothing. I fetched the stage manager, and together we forced the lock." She placed her hand over her mouth as she recalled the scene. "Oh, monsieur, it was dreadful. Porritt's little grey cell seemed to whirl, and before you knocked, Hastings and I observed you scouring the carpet. Did you notice anything there?" She glanced at Porritt, then at me. "The footprints, you mean?" "Yes, I wiped away a small part by accident when I leaned forward. Her hands trembled. Mon Dieu. Porritt murmured, "Yet you preserved the statuette's base intact." He studied her face. "I have one more question. Before you approached the door, did you pause elsewhere?" Miss Larkin shook her head. "No, monsieur. I straightened my cap and went to her door." Porritt allowed a moment's silence before turning away. He and I moved down the corridor to the stage manager's office, where a ledger lay open on a desk. The manager, a nervous young man named Perkins, stood behind the desk, clearing his throat. "When Miss Winterbourne arrived here at 5 o'clock for a final costume change," he began. Voice tentative, "she left behind her personal notebook, a small leather-bound journal. I was to lock it away until morning." Porritt picked up the notebook, his gloved fingers brushing over its cover. He opened it to a random page and examined the handwriting. But Hastings, "Observe this pencil is quite new, yet the entries vary in pressure. Some pages are bold, some faint, a troubled mind. Perhaps," I leaned forward, "what sort of entries are these?" Perkins swallowed. "Daily notes on her performances, a few personal thoughts. But earlier today, she wrote of her knees in the theatre, and of whispers behind the curtains. Then she crossed it out." He hesitated. "I thought it theatrical flair. Nothing more." Porritt's mustaches twitched. "Yet she found it significant enough to record and then to remove. Hastings, I think our deceased actress suspected someone watched her too closely." He closed the notebook and returned it to Perkins. We continued our sweep of the stage. Area. Porritt paused at the edge of the wings, where a length of crimson velvet lay crumpled. He picked up a slender silver hairpin, its tip stained faintly with perspiration, a lady's pin. He observed, "Yet I have seen no actress with such fair hair. Could belong to a member of the chorus." I noted a furrow crease between Porritt's brows. "Do you think the murderer dropped it in haste, or by accident?" Porritt replied, "But let us not presume until we question the chorus." Porritt next directed me to a side alcove near the prop room. The props were stacked haphazardly. Gilded goblets, broke picture frames, and period costumes. On a narrow table lay an envelope addressed to Miss Winterbourne. The seal had been torn, and within was a single sheet of paper bearing a cryptic note. "Midnight's shadow betrays the heart. Meet me where the velvet blooms." Porritt read the note twice, then traced a fingertip along the edge. The note was torn violently. Hastings, 3 jagged tears, and even. He tapped the floor thrice. Someone wished to disguise the originer. Hurried act. I frown. "Meet me where the velvet blooms." Could this refer to the theatre itself, or to the green velvet lounge behind the stage? Porritt suggested, "A private area. We must examine it." We found the lounge through a narrow door concealed by a heavy curtain inside. The decor matched the theatre's name, walls draped in green velvet, with plush settees and a discreet bar. A single chair lay overturned, and on its seat was a white glove flecked with dirt. Porritt picked it up gingerly. "One glove only, Hastings." He turned it inside out. "No makers. Mark, our glove belongs to one hand left, right. It has been trimmed with lace delicate, perhaps custom-made." I glanced round. No sign of struggle. Porritt shook his head. "Only this chair. And note the scuff on the wooden floor, different from the dressing-room footprints. They lead toward the stage door." I followed the trail and discovered muddy treads leading back toward the auditorium. Porritt knelt to inspect the torn fabric caught beneath the floorboard. He extracted a small piece of green velvet, not from the lounge drapes, but from the hem of a coat. Someone brushed against the paneling in awkward retreat. By now, the theatre's flashlight beams danced across the velvet walls, casting long shadows. Porritt beckoned me back to the lounge. "Hastings, We have seen footprints near 3 locations: the dressing room, the statuette, and the stage door. We have a hairpin, a glove, and a torn note. Each clue appears disparate, yet they must converge upon the murderer's identity. I felt the weight of the puzzle pressing upon me, yet beneath my anxiety, I sensed Poirot's calm certainty. He rose, evaluated the ceiling beams, then turned to me with his famous twinkle in his eye. We must question the entire company. The chorus girls, the leads, the stagehands, none may be above suspicion. As we retraced our steps toward the foyer, Poirot paused before an elaborately carved theatre mask mounted on the wall. His reflection shimmered in its polished surface alongside mine, a reminder that in this little theatre of shadows, we all played a part. Remember, Hastings, he murmured. The truth is often hidden in the smallest of details. Tomorrow, perhaps tonight, the real drama will unfold. I nodded, my mind already racing through every face I had seen that day. The first clues were laid bare. Yet the heart of the mystery remained concealed behind layers of deception. And as we prepared to summon the suspects to a gathering beneath the grand chandelier, I could not shake the feeling that Adelaide Winterbourne's final act had only just begun. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects before the glare of floodlights and the hush of the audience. The Green Velvet Theatre had, for many seasons, been a sanctuary of illusion. Yet tonight, beneath the weight of a real tragedy, it became a chamber of suspicion. Poirot and I returned to the grand foyer. Its marble floor now crisscrossed with forensic chalk and the murmur of concerned whispers. It was here that Poirot declared we would assemble every member of the company, and indeed every soul who had set foot upon these boards since dawn. A cut bell rang, echoing through the hushed hallways. From the wings emerged the chorus girls, trailing sequin skirts and nervous glances. Behind them followed the principal players, Lionel Ashcroft, the dashing lead actor whose swagger once commanded thunderous applause, Beatrice Marlowe, the playwright whose script had drawn rave reviews, and Madame Colette, the temperamental prima donna of the ensemble. Even the stagehand stoic Mr. Bramwell and jittery young Percy Dunwissomond. At the threshold of the foyer stood Inspector Mallory, clipboard in hand, ready to record every utterance. Poirot raised a slender hand and cleared his throat. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his accent crisp, his poise impeccable, "we gather tonight under sombre circumstances. You are all aware that Miss Adelaide Winterbourne was found dead in her dressing room. It is my duty to inquire into the events preceding that dreadful moment. Each of you had the opportunity and, regrettably, the potential motive to commit this crime. Let us proceed with candor." He motioned toward Miss Larkin, who had already imparted her account. Now came the turn of the chorus girls. Poirot fixed his gaze on Clara York, a petite brunette whose trembling fingers toyed with a stray sequin. "Mademoiselle York," he said, "where were you at the time of the murder?" "Between 6:50 and 7:02. Clara swallowed. "I was backstage, monsieur, preparing for the second tableau. I heard footsteps pacing behind the curtains, but assumed it was Miss Winterbourne rehearsing her lines." "Footsteps." Poirot's mustache quivered. "You say they were pacing, not leaving or entering?" Clara nodded rapidly. "Yes, back and forth." "Then nothing." Poirot turned to the next, Agnes Whitfield, whose auburn hair matched Adelaide's. She shifted uneasily. "I was with Mr. Dunn in the prop room, measuring out goblets for Act 2. I saw no one leave the dressing room, prop room," repeated Poirot, "and Mr. Dunn corroborates this." Percy Dunn, eyes darting, cleared his throat. "Yes, monsieur. We heard a muffled thud, but thought it was a prop falling. Yet you did not investigate." Poirot pressed. Percy winced. "No, sir. We were nervous about being late for our cues." A sombre hush fell as Poirot's gaze climbed to Lionel Ashcroft, who had leaned casually against the marble balustrade. The actor's fine features betrayed only mild irritation. Monsieur Ashcroft. Poirot said, "Where were you during the opening overture?" Lionel glanced at Inspector Mallory. "On stage, Monsieur. I led the company entrance." "Indeed," Poirot acknowledged. "But backstage, behind these curtains, your dressing room adjoins Miss Winterbourne's. Did you hear anything?" Lionel's expression flickered. "Nothing. But the orchestra. We were in full view of the audience. I sprinted on at 7:05, too late to notice any commotion." Poirot raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. He then addressed Beatrice Marlowe, the playwright standing with arms folded. Her eyes were defiant. "Monsieur Poirot, I have retired early. I am unwell. I was upstairs in my office." Drafting a final revision, Poirot inclined his head. "We shall verify your presence there. Meanwhile, Madame Colette, did you notice Miss Winterbourne behaving unusually recently?" Madame Colette drew herself up with practised hauteur. "Adelaide was difficult, yes, jealous of my prominence in the second act. But murder? Mon Dieu, no. She turned to Bramwell, the head stagehand, a taciturn man with broad shoulders. Mr. Bramwell. I heard you and Miss Larkin discussing locks earlier." Bramwell grunted. "I made sure every dressing-room door could be opened from the outside in an emergency. Someone may have picked that lock, an emergency lock." Poirot mused, tapping his cane. Yet Inspector Mallory found no signs of tampering beyond the fractured keyhole. Mallory nodded. "We brought in a locksmith immediately," he confirmed. "The lock was in perfect working order before it was forced." Poirot paused to survey the ragged lineup of suspects. The direct glare of the foyer chandeliers revealed sweat upon brows and fluttering hands. Even those who professed innocence bore the telltale signs of unease. He turned to me, voice low. "Hastings, observe how fear unites them. Yet each hides something distinct." He stepped forward. "I have asked each of you to remain here until further notice. Meanwhile, I require access to every private nook of this theatre, your offices, the prop cellars, even the secret passages of which few may be aware. No corner may be left unexamined, for the culprit is among you." Whispers rippled through the assembly. Beatrice Marlowe's lips pressed into a thin line. Lionel Ashcroft's chin lifted in silent defiance. The chorus girls exchanged frightened glances. Poirot turned to Inspector Mallory. "Organize a search of the premises. Compile a list of everyone present this evening, including stagehands and musicians. Hastings. I wish to interview each individually, extracting every detail. No matter how trivial. Together." Poirot and I took our place at a small table near the proscenium arch. The inspector began calling names. One by one, they approached, each subject to Poirot's gentle yet merciless scrutiny. With every question, a new wrinkle of tension formed upon her brow. His stammer betrayed a hidden thought, or denial slipped into a furtive glance. As the questioning proceeded, I noted a furtive glance exchanged between Beatrice and Lionel. Poirot's eyes flickered toward them, though his expression remained impassive. He addressed them both, his voice calm. "Secrets have a way of revealing themselves, Msamis, but only if one listens closely." When the last chorus girl retreated into the shadows, Poirot leaned back and sighed softly. "Hastings, we have uncovered small truths, but no solution. Each suspect's statement is a thread in a tangled web. It is time to observe their reactions to one another. I propose we stage a small demonstration in the auditorium, bring them together under the illusion of a rehearsal. Yet watch them through my little grey cells." I nodded, sensing the next act of this real-life drama about to begin outside. The audience, unaware of the real play unfolding, waited for a performance that would never come. Inside, the cast and crew riven by suspicion, stood on a precipice of revelation. And at the center of it all, Hercule Poirot prepared to unmask the murderer by exploiting the human heart's deepest fears. Chapter 4. Poirot Rêves. Monsieur Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the grand foyer. His posture impeccable, shoulders squared beneath his impeccable tailcoat. Even in the face of tragedy, his composure was as polished as the marble beneath his feet. The chandelier overhead cast prisms of light upon his wax moustaches, which twitched ever so slightly as he surveyed the assembled company. It was, Hastings later confided to me, the moment when Poirot truly claimed stewardship of the investigation. Inspector Mary had just concluded the formal roll call. His notebook bristling with names and timestamps, he stepped aside to allow Poirot the full stage. With a gesture as refined as a conductor's baton, Poirot motioned for silence. "My friends," he began in his precise English-French accent, "you have already provided invaluable information to Inspector Mallory. However, I must add that the official theory that this was a crime of passion committed in a blind fit does not satisfy my little grey cells." A ripple of unease passed through the suspects. Madame Colette's lips pursed. Beatrice Marlowe shifted her weight, defiantly pressing her spine against the balustrade. Poirot continued, his gaze moving deliberately from one face to another. "I observe that certain details do not align. Miss Winterbourne was not, to my mind, one to invite violence. Rather, someone orchestrated her demise with calculated precision." He stepped forward, tapping the brass rail of the staircase. "Consider the timing. The overture played. The curtain was due to rise, yet our leading lady retired to her dressing room. There, in the sanctity of her private space, she met a tragic end. The door was locked from within. Windows barred. A locked room. Yes, but I ask you, how does one reconcile a locked door with the swift disappearance of any plausible exit?" Lionel Ashcroft cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, are you implying the murder remained inside until the lock was forced?" Poirot inclined his head. "That is one possibility. Alternatively, the lock was manipulated to give the illusion of imprisonment. Someone familiar with this theatre's secrets, its hidden nooks and forgotten passages, could have entered and left unseen." Beatrice Marlowe's eyes flashed. "You suggest a backstage labyrinth, monsieur. We are no amateurs here. We know these corridors as well as our scripts." Poirot smiled faintly. "Oh, but habits breed complacency. It is the corners you never enter, the doors you never open, that conceal the greatest surprises." He paused, allowing the sentiment to settle. "Which brings me to my next point. The clues we have collected are disparate footprints, a hairpin, a glove, a cryptic note, yet they must converge." He beckoned Inspector Mallory. "Monsieur l'Inspecteur, kindly escort our suspects in pairs to the auditorium. I wish to observe their interactions under the guise of a short rehearsal." The inspector nodded and gestured for Lionel and Beatrice to step forward, followed by Madame Colette with Miss Larkin, then the chorus girls, and finally the stagehands' daughters. They filed out. Poirot turned to me, his eyes alight with purpose. "Hastings, my friend, the theatre is itself a character in this drama. Let us use its stage to draw forth the culprit." He slipped his gloved hand into his waistcoat. "You will accompany me. Observe everything. Ask nothing until instructed." We followed the inspector's party through the double doors into the cavernous auditorium. The red velvet seats gleamed in the subdued lighting, and the vast stage loomed before us. Framed by gilded proscenium, the assembled suspects took their positions as though preparing to play roles in a scene they did not understand. Lionel stood at center stage, Beatrice at the wings, Madame Colette beside the orchestra pit, the chorus girls in a hesitant cluster, and the stagehands silently at the sidelights. Porritt strode to the footlights and addressed the company. Mzamas, we shall enact a brief tableau, Monsieur Ashcroft. Please recite your opening line from The Mirror of Lies. The actor complied, his voice rich and confident. Yet Porritt's gaze never left him. When the line ended, Porritt applauded softly, then pointed to Beatrice. Madam Marlowe, deliver the passage you penned for Scene 3, the passage that refers to betrayal. Beatrice's delivery was crisp, her tone biting, and as she spoke, Porritt's eyes flicked to Madame Colette, watching for any tremor of recognition. Colette's lips twitched before she recovered her usual sterility. Porritt nodded thoughtfully. Excellent. Now, chorus, take your positions for the second tableau. The girls fumbled into formation. Porritt observed their spacing, their nervous glances. He noted one sisterly glance between Clara York and Agnes Whitfield. Did it convey solidarity or shared guilt? As the rehearsal proceeded, Porritt's voice interjected at key moments. Monsieur Ashcroft, your timing is impeccable. Yet note how your heel inadvertently scrapes the floor at that mark. A habit. He crouched to examine a fresh scuff. Footwear aligns with the prints we found near the stage door. Ashcroft glanced down at his polished shoes. I was in haste. Forgive me. Porritt straightened. Forgiveness is not mine to grant. Analysis is. He turned to Madame Colette. You, Madame, stand rigidly. Actors require flexibility. No, yet your stance resembles that of someone braced for shock. Colette's cheeks flamed. I prefer control, monsieur. On and off the stage. Control. Porritt echoed, and yet someone lacked control entirely enough to drive a blade into another's heart. He moved toward the orchestra pit, where rows of gilded instruments lay silent. Percy Dunn. Have you guitar in hand? Please play the first 3 chords of tonight's accompaniment. Young Dunn obeyed, strumming a tentative arpeggio. Porritt listened, eyes closed. Yes, excellent. Though the last chord rings a hair flat, an air of carelessness or anxiety, perhaps the same carelessness that dropped this hairpin. He produced the pin from his waistcoat pocket and displayed it under the pit lights. Dunn's face blanched. He stammered. I found that backstage before the show. Indeed, Porritt murmured. Yet no chorus girl claims it. Curious. He awaited any protest. None came. Finally, Porritt raised both hands. Mzamas, this demonstration concludes. I shall review what I have seen. Meanwhile, you are to remain until further notice. Inspector Mary will see to your comfort, but not your freedom. One by one, the company dispersed, guided back to the foyer as they filed out. Whispered speculations trailed behind them. Like confetti, Porritt and I remained on the stage, surrounded by empty seats, the echo of false applause fading into silence. Porritt turned to me, his expression radiant with the thrill of anticipation. Hastings, do you perceive how they move when they believe they act? In the theatre, we assume roles. Tonight, I observed each person in the role of themselves, and the slips, the glance. The hesitation, those are our true signs. I nodded, and settled by how laid bare their mannerisms seemed beneath Porritt's scrutiny. He picked up the torn note from the footlights, smoothing its ragged edges. Midnight shadow betrays the heart. He read softly. Yet the heart betrays itself long before the clock strikes 12. We must return to the lounge, search the secret panel behind the portrait, and examine the private office upstairs. Only then will the next act of this drama reveal itself. As we descended the stage steps, I realized there would be no respite for the company or for us. Porritt had arrived in full force, and his mind was already racing toward the solution. The theatre, with its illusions and shadows, had become a crucible for truth, and under Porritt's gaze, every secret trembled. Ready to be laid bare. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. The waiting room beyond the foyer was small and sparsely furnished. Two worn velvet settees, an oak-coat rack, and a single window overlooking the lantern-lit street below. Porritt guided each suspect through the narrow doorway in turn, insisting that I accompany him for all but the final interview, to ensure nothing was missed. The first to enter was Clairioc, whose eyes still brimmed. With an ease, Porritt motioned for her to sit on the settee, then produced his notebook. Mademoiselle York, I wish to revisit your statement. You said you heard pacing footsteps backstage. Did you notice their direction or rhythm? Clara pressed her hands together. They were slow at first, monsieur, then quick like someone. Troubled and restless, they paced toward the dressing room, then back toward the wings. I thought it strange when they stopped so abruptly. Rhythm can betray emotion, Porritt observed. An agitated person walks differently than one at ease. Now, tell me, did you see any unusual faces among the backstage staff tonight? Clara shook her head. No, only Percy and Bramwell, whom I passed on my way to the chorus line. She hesitated, but I did see Mr. Ashcroft slipping through the side corridor a few moments before curtain. Interesting. Porritt murmured. He scribbled in his book, then folded his notebook closed. Thank you. Mademoiselle York, you may go. Clara hurried out, shoulders hunched, leaving a faint scent of lavender. Next, Porritt beckoned Percy Dunn, whose youthful face was pale as a ghost. Monsieur Dunn, Porritt began. You and Miss Whitfield were in the prop room. You heard a muffled thud. Did either of you investigate? Percy chewed his lip. We heard it just after 6:55. Monsieur, Agnes wanted to check, but I was afraid we'd be late. And fear can be a cloak for guilt, Porritt interjected, steepling his fingers. Yet, Monsieur Dunn, tell me, what was the thud? Percy swallowed. I think a chest fell off its rack. The latch was loose. He glanced at the door. I swear we meant to look. But the props manager had already warned us sternly against missing cues. Porritt leaned forward. So you obeyed the manager's warning rather than your conscience. Noted. He tapped his notebook. Thank you, Monsieur Dunn. Next came Agnes Whitfield, her composure fragile but determined. Porritt studied her as she settled onto the settee. Mademoiselle Whitfield, you share a resemblance with Miss Winterbourne. Did you ever feel jealousy toward her? Agnes cringed at the question. Jealousy. Yes, perhaps I admired her too much. I wanted to be as graceful, but I would never harm her. Admiration often masks resentment. Porritt said softly. Tell me of your relationship. Did she treat you kindly? Agnes blinked back tears at first, but lately she criticized my performances, made caustic remarks about my singing. I felt hurt. She clenched her fists. But I loved her. She took me under her wing. Misdirection. Porritt murmured, gratitude can be a dangerous thing when mixed with pain. He stood, offering a polite bow. Thank you. Mademoiselle. Beatrice Marlowe entered next, her poise unshaken. Porritt gestured to the chair opposite him. Madame Marlowe, you claim to have been in your office, drafting revisions. Did anyone visit you there? Beatrice's eyes narrowed. My office is secluded. No one came. I was alone, save for Miss Larkin delivering costumes at 5:15. She leaned forward. I sent her away because I did not wish to be disturbed. Solitude can be a refuge, Porritt agreed, but also a sanctuary for secrets. What did you revise? The final lines of the betrayal scene. Beatrice replied, voice steady. I removed references to a secret marriage. It was too melodramatic. Porritt tapped his chin. Secret marriage. Did Miss Winterbourne know? Of this, Beatrice hesitated. She suspected, but dismissed it as rumour. It concerned a musician, one of your orchestra players, I believe. Thank you. Madam. Porritt closed his notebook. That will be all. Madame Colette Fifth. In the line entered with a measured step. She surveyed the room as though marking it for decoration. Porritt's sharp gaze met hers. Madame Colette, your rivalry with Miss Winterbourne was no secret. Yet you claim the tension remained professional. Colette's lips curled. Professional rivalry. Certainly, she envied my reputation. But I had no desire to harm her. Her voice was ice. I only sought artistic excellence, a noble pursuit. Porritt replied, but prowess can breed contempt. Describe your last encounter. Colette paused. We exchanged pleasantries before the first act. She complimented my costume, then asked if I could revise the aria's cadence for her benefit. I agreed. She folded her hands. There was no animosity. Porritt noted the smoothness of her speech, then nodded. Merci. Madame, the next interview was brief. Mr. Bramwell, the head sergeant, admitted checking every lock at 6:45 and repairing a minor hinge on the stage door. Beyond that, he stated, I did nothing until the commotion. His voice carried the weight of someone unused to scrutiny. Finally, Lionel Ashcroft entered, his stride confident. Porritt held a small vial of perfume in his hand. Monsieur Ashcroft, this scent jasmine d'or was detected faintly in the lounge. Do you recognize it? Lionel's brow furrowed. It is my mother's favorite. But why would I carry perfume backstage? Porritt's eyes glittered. Perhaps you gifted it to someone, or used it to mask another scent. He placed the vial on the table with care. Where were you from 6:50 to 7:02? Lionel inhaled sharply. Dressing for act I in my room. I emerged at 7:05 from my entrance. He paused. I did not leave the corridor, yet multiple footprints led there. Porritt said softly, What of the glove found in the lounge? Lionel's face paled. I found that, too. I thought it belonged to one of the chorus. He swallowed. I did not touch it. Porritt closed his notebook. Very well. Monsieur, one final question. Do you recall speaking to Miss Winterbourne earlier? Lionel hesitated. Yes, she asked about my new role. We spoke cordially. He forced a smile. Nothing more. Porritt nodded. Merci. That will suffice. With the interviews concluded. Porritt and I stood alone once more in the waiting room. The air felt heavier, each confession and denial weaving a tighter web of suspicion. Porritt folded his notebook and turned to me. Double quotes, Hastings, he said. We have gathered words, some spoken willingly, others uttered under duress. But words can mislead as easily as they reveal. It is time to examine where actions diverge from statements. He rose, eyes alight with purpose. Let us return to the theatre proper and pursue the physical evidence, for though the human heart is labyrinthine, matter itself cannot lie. Together, we stepped back into the corridor, leaving behind the trembling echoes of initial interviews and advancing toward the heart of a darker mystery. Chapter 6. The first false lead-on's pale light filtered through the high windows of the green velvet theatre, casting long shadows across the stage where Porritt and I resumed our investigation. Inspector Mallory waited by the proscenium arch, rubbing his temples as though the night's interviews had left him weary. Porritt, meanwhile, examined the scattered props, an ornate mirror, a gilded candelabrum, and a pair of stage boots, each item poised to mislead or to reveal. Inspector, Porritt began, his voice calm. You mentioned that the locksmith confirmed the dressing-room lock was untouched until forced. Yet we discovered those footprints leading from the lounge to the stage door. Have we compared the tread patterns with the boots of our suspects? Mallory nodded. I brought samples from Mr. Ashcroft and Percy Dunn. Both matched the sole impressions. Near the stage door, I assumed Ashcroft more likely those boots are his own. Porrett's mustaches twitched. Assumptions can be treacherous. Let us test the theory. He retrieved the boots placed on a raised platform and carefully lifted, one with a handkerchief. Underneath, mud caked the heel. Porrett beckoned Mary to fetch a damp cloth. With meticulous patience, he cleaned the sole, then pressed it onto a sheet of clean paper. The print left a crisp outline, a series of elongated ovals encircling a central diamond. Next, Porrett summoned Lionel Ashcroft. The actor emerged from the wings, still clad in his evening attire. Eyes narrowed in impatience, Porrett held up the print. "Monsieur Ashcroft, will you examine this impression? Does it match your stage boots?" Lionel leaned forward, brow creased. "Yes, it's identical. I must have stepped in mud before entering the lounge." He glanced at the boots. "But I wore different shoes on stage slippers for the second act." Porrett nodded. "Indeed. Yet the footprints near the dressing room match this print. Now, Monsieur Dunn." The young stagehand approached. Boots dusted with sawdust. Porrett lifted one and examined the sole. "Hastings, note the triangular studs absent here. These belong exclusively to Ashcroft." He turned to Lionel. "So you ventured from the auditorium to the lounge, then to the dressing-room entrance. Pray, to what purpose?" Lionel hesitated, fingers tightening round his coat. "I retrieved my coat from the lounge. I'd forgotten it there during rehearsal. That's all." Porrett's eyes narrowed, and yet no coat was reported missing. "Inspector, was any coat taken from the lounge to lost and found?" Mallory shook his head. "No. I assume Mr. Ashcroft reclaimed his own." Porrett tapped the print. "A plausible explanation. But we must verify it. Inspector, locate Mr. Ashcroft's coat. Note its condition and whether it bears mud." The inspector scurried off. Porrett turned to me. "Hastings, do you recall Lionel's exchange with Beatrice last night? He seemed tense when she mentioned the aria's cadence." I nodded. "They argued briefly backstage. She accused him of overshadowing her starring role. Jealousy so easily becomes suspicion." Porrett mused. "But let us not be blinded by motive alone." We moved to the private offices upstairs, where the playwright's study awaited. Beatrice Marlowe sat, clutching a shawl, her eyes tired. Porrett directed his gaze to the desk, where papers lay strewn in apparent disarray. He examined a torn corner of a script scene 3, the betrayal scene. Lines referencing a forged alibi were crossed out in crimson ink. Porrett picked up the ink pot, testing its viscosity, fresh. He observed, "Likely used within the last hour." He brandished the page. Why remove references to a forged alibi, unless one intended to practice the deceit? Beatrice paled. "I removed them for clarity. My publisher demands brevity, yet you crossed out only those lines." Porrett replied, leaving the rest intact. He tapped the page, a curious precision. Beatrice's voice trembled. "I admire Miss Winterbourne's instincts. She hoped to sharpen the drama." I disagreed, and yet the script now hints at alibis. Porrett said softly, "Alibis can be forged in real life." Before Beatrice could respond, Inspector Malley returned, holding a mud-stained overcoat. Its hem was flecked with the same soil found in the lounge and on the stage door. Mallory presented it to Porrett. "Mr. Ashcroft's coat, sir." Porrett examined the fabric, then draped it over the desk lamp. Under the glare, a faint smudge of lipstick marked the lapel. He sniffed the collar, a floral scent, Madame Colette's fragrance. At that moment, the door opened and Madame Colette entered, hands clasped. Her composure was impeccable, but her eyes flickered at the sight. Averse and mingling with the evidence, Porret held up the coat. "Madam, do you recognize this scent?" Colette's breath hitched. "My perfume. Yes, but you could not conclude its wearer. True." Porret agreed, but note the combination. Torn script lines referencing deceit. A coat bearing your perfume but soaked in mud, and footprints leading to a locked room. We seem to have a false lead. He turned to the small group assembled. Lionel Ashcroft, Beatrice Marlowe, and Madame Colette. "Tell me, Ms. Amos, what were you three plotting last night?" His gaze danced between them. Lionel swallowed. "We discussed the final rehearsal, nothing more." Beatrice stiffened. "Our argument was only about artistic integrity." Colette's voice was brittle. "I wished to refine my entrance. That's all." Porret's voice grew sharper. "And did any of you enter the lounge after hours?" All statements assert absence. Yet the coat and script betray your presence. Silence fell. Then Lionel broke it. "I did visit the lounge once after midnight. I retrieved my coat." Porret inclined his head. "At midnight. Then. But the murder occurred between 6:50 and 7:02. Thus this coat is a red herring." Beatrice's shoulders slumped in relief. But Colette's eyes blazed. "So you accuse me of planting evidence?" Porret allowed the question to hang. "Not yet. But I caution you, misdirection is a suspect's favorite weapon." "Inspector," Mallory interjected, "shall we send the coat for a forensics?" Porret waved a gloved hand. "No. Its purpose has been served as a false lead to distract us from the true culprit's maneuvers." His voice softened as he addressed us both. "Hastings, we have spent the morning chasing shadows. Now we must focus on the nexus of all clues, the secret panel in the lounge, the torn note, and the letter opener itself, for the real murderer will not plant a decoy so clumsily." He turned to the trio. "Lionel, Beatrice, Madam, you three may return to the foyer, but I will ask each of you again. Where did you truly spend the hours before the curtain?" As they departed, their expressions a blend of relief and lingering dread. Porret tapped his chin. "Hastings, the coat was meant to implicate an innocent. A clever ruse, but it misfires under scrutiny. I trust our false lead has taught us that the simplest explanation remains the correct one." I nodded. Yet in my gut I knew another trap awaited. With Porret's certainty guiding me, I braced for the next revelation. The theatre's illusions had grown more elaborate and the real drama was only beginning. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the theatre's upper windows, casting angular beams across the polished floorboards as Porret and I reconvened in the green velvet lounge. The secret panel behind the portrait remained obstinately closed, its mechanism refusing to give under Porret's delicate ministrations. Yet the air crackled with a new tension. Porret had signaled the commencement of the next phase of his inquiry, the psychological game. Inspector Mallory had assembled the key suspects: Lionel Ashcroft, Beatrice Marlowe, Madame Colette, and Miss Logan. They sat in a semicircle upon the plush green settees, their expressions guarded as Porret took his place in the center, beneath the softly swaying drapery. Hastings lingered near the doorway, ready to observe without intervening. Porret began. With gentle politeness, "Miss Amos, our day has been filled with interviews and false leads. Now, I invite you to partake in a small exercise in empathy and honesty." He extended his palms. His look disarming. "I wish each of you to recount the final moments before discovering Miss Winterbourne's body, but in the guise of another. Assume the role of your nearest neighbor here." A hush fell. Lionel cleared his throat first. "Monsieur, by Marshall. Rule of this exercise. I shall speak as Madame Colette." He rose, smoothing the lapels of an imaginary coat, and adopted a clipped tone. "I was rehearsing my aria in the dressing room When I thought I heard Miss Winterbourne crying, I paused, considering whether to comfort her, but thought better of it. I had my own performance to prepare. Beatrice's lips twitched. Very good, Lionel. She rose, adopting Clara York's nervous posture. I was backstage, adjusting my skirt when the orchestra began. I sensed a disruption behind the curtain, a muffled cry perhaps, but I kept to my duties. Her eyes darted to Clara, who looked affronted. Clara stood next. In Madame Colette's regal imitation, I retreated to my dressing-room to primp my hair, only to catch sight of a shadow at the keyhole. I froze, unwilling to confront an intruder. I left at once. Her hands fluttered, betraying her. Finally, Miss Larkin lifted herself from the settee. Mimicking Beatrice's composed poise, I finished helping Miss Marlowe with her costume, then heard a thump in the adjacent room. I thought it only a dropped prop and hurried on. Wishing to avoid embarrassment from Miss Marlowe, she smiled wanly, but her eyes gleamed with unspoken emotion. Porritt allowed each impersonation to settle. "Bravo, Samus," he said softly. "You have shown me how you perceive one another. Notice the choices: care, fear, avoidance. These are windows into your inner selves." He tapped the floor 3 times. "Now, let us test these perceptions with a question." He turned to Lionel. "Monsieur Ashcroft, you speak as Madame Colette. Of hearing Miss Winterbourne cry, did you ever hear her raise her voice in anger?" Lionel blinked. I heard raised tones during rehearsal," he admitted. "But not real anger, merely frustration with my timing." His eyes flicked toward Colette, who watched him with measured coolness. Porritt shifted to Beatrice. "Madame Marlowe, playing Miss York, you claimed to sense a disruption, but did not investigate. Why did you not do so in reality?" Beatrice's throat bobbed. I feared drawing attention to myself. She confessed, "I did not wish to be late." Porritt moved on to Clara. "Mademoiselle York, you imitated Madame Colette, fearful of confronting an intruder. Have you ever feared the prima donna?" Clara blinked, then shook her head vehemently. "No, monsieur, only respect." Porritt's gaze softened. "Respect can conceal trepidation." He turned to Miss Larkin. "And you, playing Madame Marlowe, spoke of avoiding embarrassment. Do you feel embarrassed often?" Larkin's shoulders shook. "Only when I err," she whispered. "I am young and tested." Her tears came despite herself. Porritt steepled his fingers. "Each of you revealed a truth about your own hesitation." Lionel's empathy withheld. Beatrice's ambition. Clara's deference, Larkin's inexperience. "But tell me, which of these traits masks the capacity for violence?" He paused, letting the question linger like a dropped note in an aria. A silence ensued, broken only by the distant creak of the stage above. Then Porritt stood and circled the group, his cane tapping a careful rhythm. "Let us test another theory," he said, addressing Colette. "Madam, you have maintained your righteousness. Yet one detail puzzles me: the missing pearl earring, found by Miss Winterbourne's body. You once performed wearing a matching set. Why is yours intact?" Colette's composure slipped. "That earring was a gift from me to her," she confessed at last. Voice taut, "She admired it, and I gladly relinquished it." She swallowed. "She wore only mine tonight." Porritt nodded. A generous gesture or a subtle message, for jewelry can speak louder than words. He tapped his cheek. "Yet the real question is this: why remove such a symbol of trust?" Colette's face blanched. Before she could respond, Lionel spoke up. "If she wore your earring, then the pearl beside her body belonged to another, someone with no right to that gift." His voice was low, calculated. Porritt smiled. "Indeed. And that someone is among us." He beckoned Inspector Mary. "Fetch the jewelry case from Miss Winterbourne's dressing room." The inspector departed at once. Porritt turned back to the fore. While we await its rival, I wish you each to recount, not where you were, but whom you trusted in the theatre. For trust betrays loyalties, and loyalties can fracture under pressure. He took a slow breath. I shall begin. He recounted how he had entrusted his valet with delicate tasks, yet never lost vigilance. He contrasted this with the suspects. The actor who trusted his co-star, the playwright who trusted her words, the prima donna who trusted her status, the dresser who trusted her kindness. Each analogy was deftly drawn, exposing subtle jealousies and fears. By the time Inspector Malley returned, carrying the leather case, Porritt's psychological tapestry was complete. He opened the case. It contained only a single earring, not a pair. The missing half-Adelaide's own had vanished before the murder. Porritt closed the case gently. "Monsieur Ashcroft," he said, voice measured, "you claimed empathy withheld. Yet you pocketed Miss Winterbourne's earring when she turned away." Lionel's jaw clenched. "Monsieur," he protested, "I did it to protect her. She seemed so distraught. I feared someone would steal it." His voice faltered. Porritt's eyes glittered. "Perhaps. Yet you also pocketed the pearl without hesitation, and did not return until after all was lost." He pointed to the others. "Each of you has your secrets." But Lionel's gesture was the first sign of a concealed action. He stepped back. "Our psychological game has exposed the cracks. Now we know who moves in shadows." He closed his eyes briefly, as though savoring the moment. Then he opened them, turning to me. "Hastings, observe, it was not a confession that brought this to light, but the weight of unspoken emotions. The heart, when probed, reveals its contradictions." As the suspects exchanged anxious glances, Porritt tapped his cane once more. "We have played our game. Soon, the final act will reveal the culprit's identity. But for now, let this lesson stand. The mind's misdirection is the most dangerous of all." Chapter 8. A secondary mystery hush that settled over the Green Velvet Theatre after Porritt's psychological gambit was shattered by a sudden commodity. In the upper corridors, Inspector Mallory and I rushed toward the source of the disturbance, finding Madame Colette collapsed against the wall outside the playwright's study. Her complexion was pallid, eyes half-lidded, and trembling fingers clutched a silver teacup stained with a dark fleck at its rim. "Poison," gasped Miss Larkin, kneeling beside Colette and pressing a damp handkerchief to her forehead. Lionel Ashcroft and Beatrice Marlowe hovered anxiously, while Clara York stood frozen in shock. Porritt knelt gently beside Colette, his expression serene yet intense. He removed the teacup and examined the dark residue at its base. "Yes, moan. Only poisoned tea. Fortunately, the dose was too small." He sniffed the cup. "Bitter almond." He murmured, "Cyanide. Quick-acting." But this was diluted. The villain wished only to frighten or to divert our attention. Inspector Malley barked an order. "Clear the corridor. Send for a doctor and secure the teacup." Stagehands scrambled to the sides. Easing the crowd back, Porritt rose, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. He surveyed the suspects. "Samus, it appears our murderer is growing bold, experimenting with new tactics. While we examine one deception, another crime unfolds." He turned to the inspector. "Have any of you seen who delivered this tea?" Percy Dunn, pale as chalk, raised his hand. "I did, monsieur. I brought her tea from the lounge at her request. I placed it on the windowsill outside her office, and knocked. She thanked me and took it." His voice trembled. Porritt's mustaches twitched. "When did she request it?" "Just after noon, around 12:15. Dunn replied. "She said she felt faint, only faint." Porritt pressed. "Not threatened." Percy shook his head. No, sir. She seemed tired from yesterday's rehearsal. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, reconstructing the timeline. Then he addressed Beatrice. You were in your office drafting revisions when you heard the crash. Did anyone approach you earlier, claiming a message from Miss Winterbourne? Beatrice's lips parted. Yes, I got a note slipped under my door at noon. It read, "Meet me in the Green Lounge at once." I thought it from Adelaide. She glanced at the teacup. She sent for me regularly. Poirot nodded, and you complied. Beatrice frowned. I did. Only to find her testy and impatient. Clara spoke up. I saw you both talking in hushed tones. Then you returned alone, pale and agitated. Beatrice stiffened. I was concerned for her. I left to fetch a doctor, but found her here. Poirot tapped his cane. So Madame Colette called you under false pretenses, and that brings us to the missing letters. He turned to Inspector Mary. Has anything else disappeared from Adelaide's dressing room? Mary rifled through his notebook. Her correspondence, all sealed letters are gone. One bore the monogram AW. These letters could contain motives or threats. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A secondary mystery. Indeed, a forbidden message, a staged collapse, and a vanished letter. The murderer seeks to unbalance us, too. Scatter our focus. He bowed to the group. I propose we search the dressing room at once, every drawer, every seam of the furniture. Then we shall examine the lounge's secret panel again. There hides our next clue. We moved as one toward the dressing room, the corridor ringing with hurried footsteps upon entry. Poirot's gaze swept the chaos of overturned cosmetics and strewn gowns. He retrieved a small brass-handled trinket box from the vanity table and pried it open. Inside lay only a single earring, Madame Colette's gift, while the missing letters had vanished in turn. Eli, Poirot produced a pair of forceps and extracted a length of thin black thread from the lining of the box's velvet interior. Note: Hastings, this thread does not match any fabric here. It is silk, perhaps from a glove or costume. He held it to the light. Furthermore, the hinges of this box bear fresh scratches, as if someone rifled through in search of letters, but forsook them upon discovering precious jewelry instead. He dropped the thread into a glass jar for safekeeping. He then turned to the writing desk. Look here, papers torn and crumpled, yet no letters among them. The culprit must have pocketed the missives, but why remove them? To hide a motive, to protect someone. Poirot stroked his chin. Or to misdirect our sympathies. Inspector Mary unlatched the wardrobe and found its back panel unhinged. Inside was a hidey hole, empty save for dust and stray hairpins. Nothing here, Mallory announced. Poirot tapped a finger against the wardrobe's frame. Yet Hastings recalled the crumbled note from the prop room. It directed someone to wear the velvet blooms. We found that to be this lounge. The lounge holds secrets we have barely scratched. He motioned toward the heavy portrait concealing the panel dot at his signal. Percy pressed the small latch hidden beneath the frame. The panel swung inward with a groan, revealing a narrow cavity lined with faded green satin. Within lay a single envelope corresponding to the missing letters, stamped with Adelaide's seal and bearing a crimson wax crest. Poirot retrieved it with careful precision. He slit the wax seal and extracted the letter. The script was delicate, penned by Adelaide herself. My dearest A.W., I fear that events tonight may force my hand. Trust no one in the theatre. The shadows betray more than the light. Meet me by the river at dusk if you value truth. Ever yours. Adelaide, Poirot read aloud. Trust no one in the theatre. The shadows betray more than the light. A warning to partner or lover A.W., a confidant outside our circle. He handed me the letter. Hastings. Who among our suspects might correspond only in secrecy? Who would Adelaide risk a clandestine meeting with? I pondered. Beatrice. She's published under her own name. Lionel. A public figure. Clara and Agnes. Too young. Pussy. Unlikely. Could A.W. be Adelaide herself addressing someone with her own initials as code? Porritt shook his head. No. My friend. A.W. must be another someone of trust. Yet she hid the letter in her dressing room, indicating peril within these walls. He folded the note carefully and returned it to the envelope. Now, we have a new culprit's timeline. Someone removed her letters, poisoned Colette, and concealed evidence in this lounge. The murderer's boldness escalates. He replaced the panel with a decisive click. Let us return to the foyer, gather the suspects once more, and reveal this secondary mystery. For only by confronting them with the missing correspondence and the attempted poisoning can we observe the true reactions and thereby know our field of suspects as we exited. I realized the stakes had risen sharply. The theater, once merely a stage for a deception, had become a battleground of secrets and betrayal, and at its center, Porritt prepared to draw the final contours of a crime more twisted than ever imagined. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections, the Grand Four of the Green. Velvet Theatre had become, by this late afternoon, arena for revelations. Porritt stood beneath the chandelier's glittering crystals, his little grey cells humming as he surveyed the assembled company. Lionel Ashcroft, Beatrice Marlowe, Madame Colette Clairioc, Agnes Whitfield, Percy Dunn, Miss Larkin, and Head. Stagehand Bramwell. Inspector Mary stood discreetly by the balustrade, ready to intervene if needed. Porritt cleared his throat. Zamas, we have uncovered a secondary mystery. The disappearance of Miss Winterbourne's letters and the attempted poisoning of Madame Colette. Yet these crimes do not occur in isolation. They are the product of hidden connections, relationships, and shared secrets. Tonight, we shall expose them. He motioned to the letter extracted from the secret panel. Behold Miss Winterbourne's warning to a confidant. Signed only A.W. who among you had knowledge of this correspondence. He paused, his gaze sweeping the group. Beatrice shifted. Looking at Lionel, I knew of Adelaide's private letters, she admitted. She once confided in me that she feared someone among us. Madame Colette nodded, her lips tight. She mentioned an old friend, someone from before she joined this company. Clara York glanced nervously at Agnes. I overheard her talking to Miss Whitfield about a shared past at the conservatory. Agnes's eyes widened. That was before Adelaide became famous. She exhaled sharply. Adelaide and I studied singing together in Vienna. We were close until an incident I have never revealed. Porritt's mustaches twitched. An incident, Agnes swallowed. It involved a scholarship competition. Adelaide won. I felt betrayed, though she had every right. We drifted apart after that. He turned to Clara. And you? Who found the glove in the lounge? What of your relationship? Clara's voice trembled. I was once a protégé of Adelaide. She mentored me, took me under her wing. I worshipped her, until she criticized my performance so harshly. I quit the academy. Percy Dunn raised his hand, and I played the piano for both of you in Vienna when you were friends. The chorus girls exchanged startled glances. A murmur rippled through the group as the theater's walls seemed to close in. Porritt raised a hand. So the Green Velvet Theatre is not the origin of these connections, but only the stage where old wound. S were reopened. He tapped his cane on the marble. Still, only one of you sought to silence Adelaide permanently. He turned to Lionel Ashcroft. Monsieur, you and Adelaide once performed a duet that received rave reviews. Yet I discovered a letter in the lounge suggesting you felt overshadowed by her voice. He produced a small scrap of paper from his waistcoat, a torn program with Lionel's autograph, and a cryptic note in a trembling hand. Your melody outshines mine. Lionel's jaw clenched. I I admired her voice, but I never envied her. Poirot nodded. Admiration can breed more potent emotions than envy. It can ferment into resentment. He faced Beatrice. Madame, you offer the play, yet Adelaide rewrote parts to showcase her talents. Your revisions were torn from the script, presumably by her hand. Did you resent her appropriating your work? Beatrice's eyes flashed. I was angry. Yes, but it was for the play's success. A pragmatic motive. Poirot murmured. He then addressed Madame Colette. You remained aloof from Adelaide's circle. Yet I found in your dressing room a locked diary stamped with her initials. He held up a small key. This key was worn at the tip, suggesting frequent use. Yet you claimed no personal relationship. Colette's shoulders sagged. She threatened to expose our secret. She knew I borrowed funds, meant for company expenses. Gasps erupted. Colette covered her mouth. Poirot raised a calming hand. A monetary scandal, then a threat to your reputation. He shifted to Agnes Whitfield. You once shared a scholarship competition with Adelaide, yet you claim your rivalry ended long ago. Why, then? Did I find a cryptic entry in her notebook? Erased line reading. She knows what I did in Vienna. Agnes froze. We argued that night. Something happened, she confided. I stole her sheet music. I returned it, but trust was broken. Poirot's gaze softened. I see a pattern. Ambition, envy, fear, betrayal, threads that bind you all. He paused, then turned to Miss Larkin and you. Dear Larkin, your loyalty was unwavering until last night. Yet you cleaned away key footprints with haste. Why? Miss Larkin bit her lip. I feared our fragile company would fall apart. I wanted to protect everyone. Protection through deception. Poirot noted. He beckoned Bramwell. Forward. Mr. Bramwell. You oversee every prop and lock. You told us the stage door had no secret mechanisms, yet I found a misplaced panel hinge in the corridor. Who else knew of it? Bramwell's face darkened. Only Adelaide, and I discovered it when searching for lost scripts. Poirot tapped his cane lightly. So she entrusted you, and only you. He surveyed the circle. Thus, 3 forged connections, scholarly rivalry, artistic appropriation, financial impropriety. Each suspect had cause to harm Adelaide. But notice the common denominator. Betrayal under the guise of trust. He stepped back. Now, Samus, I offer you one more exercise, with deliberate calm. He handed each suspect a sealed envelope, identical in weight and texture. Within these envelopes is your own confession written by Miss Winterbourne. Each page contains the one secret she deemed most dangerous. The group exchanged bewildered glances, then simultaneously tore the seals. Gasps and murmurs filled. The heirs each read the accusation within. Lionel's envy, Beatrice's resentment, Colette's embezzlement, Agnes's theft, Larkin's concealment of evidence, Dunson's, and Bramwell's concealment of the secret panel. Poirot observed their reactions closely. Some paled, others bristled. Finally, he raised his hand for silence. Adelaide's final gambit was to force the guilty to reveal themselves. But one suspect received no letter, received no warning, because that person was already in her confidence. The murderer knew she would leave no trail for them. He paused to let the words sink in. Msemas, the true culprit, stood willing to bear the weight of secrets, while leaving others exposed. And that person is... He stepped forward, pointing with his cane. Beatrice Marlowe. His stunned silence fell. Beatrice's hand shook, her eyes brimming with tears. Poirot's voice was gentle yet firm. You envied Adelaide's growing prominence in your own play. When she rewrote lines to cancel your betrayal twist, you acted in anger. You slipped into the lounge that morning, took her letters to conceal your motive, then poisoned Colette. To divert suspicion, knowing Colette's knowledge of your financial affair would draw attention, you planted the glove and hairband, then returned for your coat and elaborate misdirection. Beatrice's shoulders crumpled. She whispered, "It was never meant to go so far." Poirot inclined his head. "Yet it did, madam, and now the curtain falls on this dark performance." Inspector Mary stepped forward to place Beatrice in custody. The others clustered. Relief mingled with regret in their eyes as they led her away. Poirot turned to me, "Hastings. Once again, the heart's hidden connections have unveiled the truth. Trust is a fragile stage, one false chord, and the whole drama collapses." I nodded. Awed by the intricate tapestry of motives and misdirections, the Green Velvet Theatre, for all its artifice, had finally yielded its secret. And as Poirot's spirit of order emerged triumphant, I knew that tonight's real drama would linger in memory far longer than any staged performance. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue that evening. The Green Velvet Theatre stood hushed after the day's tumultuous revelations. The suspects had been dispersed to separate waiting rooms under Inspector Mary's watchful eye. Poirot, however, remained alone upon the silent stage, the empty footlights casting his elongated shadow across the boards. I found him there, seated at center stage, spreading before him an array of the case's most perplexing tokens: the hairband, the single glove, the torn velvet fragment, the letter opener, and most intriguingly the small silver snuff of candle. Wax he had pried from the dressing-room sill. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, lifting the wax nugget between thumb and forefinger. "Most would dismiss this as mere residue, yet it holds a secret." He passed the wax to me. It gleamed coolly under the footlights. I could just discern a faint pattern impressed upon its surface, as though a stamp had landed there. "What does it mean?" I asked. "Note the pattern. Concentric rings. Yes, not from the candle itself, but from the candlestick space. Someone placed the candle upon a table with a raised, circular lip, but in Miss Winterbourne's dressing room no such table exists." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "And yet a similar lip is found on the base of the gilded statuette in the foyer. I recalled the statuette, the bronze dancer perched on its plinth. You think the candle was lit there?" "Exactly. Hastings, at precisely 6:50 just before the overture, the murderer needed darkness to conceal movements. By blowing out the candle upon that statuette, they gained a moment's obscurity." He returned the wax to its box. "But what followed is key." Poirot rose and led me toward the foyer, where the statuette stood. Under his instruction, Inspector Mary removed it from its pedestal. Indeed, the lip at its base matched the imprint in the wax. Poirot then examined the carpet beneath, a faint scorch mark, no larger than a dime, where hot wax had dripped. "See here," Poirot said, kneeling. "The scorch aligns with the statuette's right side. The murderer crouched here, extinguished the candle, and hastened off toward the dressing-room, footsteps masked by darkness. He tapped the floor, but note the angle of approach. They angled from the back entrance, not the main corridor. Only someone familiar with the theater's backstairs would dare such a route." I considered the suspects. Only one had shown intimate knowledge of every backstage passage: Bramwell, the head stagehand. Yet he had seemed above suspicion, loyal and unassuming. Poirot strode to the stage door and pointed. "These stairs descend to the stage's sub-basement, where props and locked boxes are stored. No actor would venture there unbidden. Bramwell has keys, the rest do not." He paused, eyes narrowing. "And yet last night, no one reported hearing his footsteps. We descended the stairs, passing through the dim prop cellars until we reached the locked hatch that led beneath the stage." Poirot produced a key one he had filched from Bramwell's coat when retrieving the false. Reed inserted it and opened the hatch. A spiral passage of wood and planks led downward into gloom. He held a lantern aloft. Here, Hastings, is where the murderer hid before entering the foyer on scene. Notice the small alcove carved into the wall it once held stage smoke pots. Now, long emptied, yet faint chalk traces remain upon its shelf. Poirot traced the chalk lines with his finger, chalk identical to that used to mark clues in the rehearsal room. Chalk that only Bramwell and Percy Dunn would have used. I crouched beside him, but Dunn is too inexperienced. He'd tremble under such complexity. Precisely, Poirot agreed. Bramwell, however, moves among chaos daily. He could mask the chalk scent, could avoid notice, yet he underestimated the wax. From the alcove, he lit the candle, then dropped the wax upon extinguishing. A minute detail and the secret clue is his undoing. He extinguished the lantern. We must confront Bramwell at once, Hastings, but privately, for if we alert the others, they may flee or destroy evidence. He replaced the hatch and ascended with quiet urgency. Back in the foyer. Poirot instructed Inspector Mallory to retrieve Bramwell alone. Moments later, Bramwell was ushered in, his broad shoulders tense. Poirot stood before him, cane in hand. Monsieur Bramwell, I commend your attention to detail. You alone possessed the knowledge of the back stairs and the alcove. You carried a candle to conceal your approach and dropped the wax imprint an unintended signature. Yet it was not the more apparent clues that betrayed you, but the faint imprint upon the wax itself. Bramwell's face turned ashen. He stammered, I only meant to scare her, to stop her from exposing our death scandal. I never planned murder. His shoulders ached. When she refused to remain silent, I panicked. Poirot inclined his head. Fear can drive even the most steadfast to desperate acts, but the wax whispers the truth that words conceal. He motioned to Inspector Mallory. Take him into custody. As Bramwell was led away, Poirot turned to me, voice soft. Hastings. The smallest clue the secret imprint has unmasked. The murderer. It is a reminder that in the theatre of crime, no detail is too trivial for the vigilant eye. I nodded, reflecting on the journey from the scandalous letters to the poisoned teacup and now to a hidden candle alcove. Each step had required Poirot's singular insight. He placed a hand upon the statuette's plinth. Now, Hastings, we prepare for the confrontation, gather the company once more for the final gathering. For there remains one last act, the unveiling of motive, sequence, and justice served. Together, we walked back into the silent auditorium, ready for Poirot's next masterstroke. Chapter 11. Tensions risen after moonlight had waned by the time Poirot reconvened the remaining company in tea. He green velvet lounge. Bramwell was in custody, spirited away by Inspector Mallory. But his absence only amplified the unease among those left behind. The plush settees seemed suddenly cramped. The rich velvet upholstery a stifling reminder of the theatre's hidden sins. Poirot stood at the head of the room, cane in hand, his posture as unruffled as ever. Round him sat Lionel Ashcroft, Clara York, Agnes Whitfield, Percy Dunn, and Miss Larkin. Even Beatrice, though freed from suspicion, lingered in the doorway, arms folded, eyes guarded. Poirot's gaze swept the circle. Mzamas. He began. Softly, the arrest of Monsieur Bramwell answers one question, but raises another. What became of our other secrets? How will you, in his absence, reconcile the trust you each placed in one another? A tremor ran through Clara York. She glanced at Agnes, whose expression had turned ashen. Agnes broke the silence. I trusted Adelaide despite our rivalry, and yet she trusted Bramwell with her secrets. He betrayed that trust. Clara nodded, voice small. I feel foolish for complaining about harsh words. When the real betrayal lay in stolen letters and poisoned tea, Lionel Ashcroft rose, pacing the length of the lounge. "Forgive me, but I find this all too tidy. Bramwell had opportunity. Yes, but what of the glove and hairpin? What of the coat and the footprints that implicated me?" Agnes flinched at his tone. "You admitted your jealousy. Lionel, you pocketed Adelaide's earring. That was your misstep, not mine." Percy Dunn glanced at the others, uncertainty creasing. His brow. "I'm not sure who to trust any more. I thought Bramwell was loyal, but he hid the alcove. Then I thought it was Lionel, until the wax proved otherwise." Miss Larkin, seated stiffly, pressed her hands together. "I erased footprints and clues, thinking I protected everyone. Yet I see now I only shielded the guilty." Beatrice Marlowe stepped forward, though her voice trembled. "If Bramwell acted alone, then the theatre's shadows remain populated with our unspoken motives. Can any of us claim innocence of jealousy, of envy, or of betrayal?" Lionel halted his pacing and looked to Beatrice. "I envy you your authorship. But I would never harm Adelaide." Beatrice's eyes blazed. "And you your stage presence. Yet neither of us broke the law." Porritt raised his cane. "Silence, s'il vous plaît. What you describe is the theatre of human frailty. Now that one conspirator has been removed, you must face the mirror of your own hearts." He turned to Percy. "Monsieur Dunn, you felt duty-bound to ignore a thud in the prop room. Your silence nearly cost us the truth." Percy hung his head. "I see that now. I was frightened. Yes, but I should have acted." "And Miss Larkin," Porritt continued, "you wiped away footprints in good faith, yet compromised the investigation. Fearful loyalty is still culpable." Her shoulders quivered. "I only wished to spare my friends." Lionel cleared his throat. "So we all bear some guilt. But Bramwell's betrayal was calculated. He alone crossed the line into murder." Porritt nodded. "Precisely. Yet consider how your individual actions paved the way for his crime. Clara's deference, Agnes's resentment, my own healing of false leads. Each of you unwittingly created a path for the murderer. Agnes's eyes filled with tears. Then we are all culpable in some measure." Lionel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We did not kill her, Agnes. We faltered. But he planned." Clara spoke softly. "Perhaps Bramwell depended on our weaknesses, our silence, our envy, our fear to conceal his own." Porritt allowed a faint smile. "Exactly. And that is why the tensions among you rose so swiftly. You recognized echoes of your own hearts in his treachery." He turned to Beatrice. "Madame Marlowe, will you remain to oversee the final rehearsal? The stage must be cleared of this evening's shadows." Beatrice lifted her chin. "Yes, Monsieur Porritt, I will see it done." Porritt tapped his cane. "Very well. And you, I must take this time to reflect on your part in this tragedy. Tomorrow we shall convene one last time for the confrontation. Until then, I trust you will sleep if you can, knowing the truth is no easier to bear when shared." As the group dispersed, uneasily each to their separate rooms, I lingered by Porritt's side. He watched the suspects fall away, then turned to me. "Hastings," he said quietly, "the first act revealed motive, the second confusion, the third must bring resolution. But tonight we witnessed how fear and guilt intertwine." He tapped his temple. "Each heart is a theatre, filled with shadows. Our task is to illuminate them so that justice, like the footlights, may shine with clarity." I nodded, absorbing his words. Outside, the green velvet theatre slumbered in an easy stillness, its corridors echoing with the day's revelations. And within, Porritt's little grey cells prepared for the grand confrontation yet to come. Chapter 12. The confrontation that evening while rain tapped insistently against the theatre's stained glass windows. Porritt beckoned me to join him in the small holding room where Bramwell was confined. The single lamp overhead cast stark shadows against the stone walls, turning the room into a dim stage for a private performance. Bramwell sat on a wooden bench, his broad frame hunched. Eyes red-rimmed, Porritt placed his cane against the wall and regarded Bramwell with cool intensity. "Monsieur Bramwell, you have been with us since dawn, yet your story remains incomplete. I wish now to probe the heart of your motives and methods." Bramwell swallowed hard, running a rough hand through his thinning hair. I told the inspector everything, Monsieur Porritt. I admitted to the letters, the alcove, the poison. Not everything, Porritt replied, steepling his fingers. You admitted to silencing Adelaide Winterbourne for a fear she would expose your embezzlement. You confessed to using the alcove to enter unseen, to attempting to frighten Madame Colette. Yet you omitted key details that only someone intimately acquainted with Miss Winterbourne's habits could know. Bramwell's shoulders tensed. I gave you the wax from the statuette, the thread from the box, even my coat. What more could you want? But you left behind the letter opener itself. Porritt produced the small silver blade from his waistcoat pocket and set it on the bench beside Bramwell. The blade flickered under the lamp. Bramwell's face drained of colour. You found it. He whispered. Of course, Porritt said gently. It lay beneath the chaise longue in the dressing-room, concealed by a fold of velvet, a crude hiding place, yet a telling one. Only someone who knew that exact spot would risk returning to retrieve the weapon. Bramwell's breath rattled in his chest. I panicked. I thought I'd burned the letters, so I hid the knife in darkness. I didn't think you'd look so carefully. Porritt's eyes glinted. And when I did, you realized that your alibi claiming you only repaired the hinges would crumble. Thus, you planted the false lead of Lionel's coat to distract us. Bramwell flinched. But there's more, Porritt continued, leaning closer. When you lit the candle on the statuette's plinth, you left wax. That led to your undoing. But you also stamped the wax with remnants of your cufflink and insignia of the Green Velvet Theatre's stagehands. A naive slip, Monsieur. Bramwell's head fell. A single tear traced down his cheek. I didn't mean to kill her, he choked. I only wanted to scare her into silence. When she confronted me about the missing funds, I lost control. Porritt nodded thoughtfully. Fear and shame can drive a man to desperation. Yet you also manipulated others' weaknesses. You counted on Miss Larkin's loyalty to erase footprints, on Beatrice's resentment to focus suspicion. Elsewhere, you orchestrated the psychological game. Bramwell's lips trembled. Yes, I watched you question them, tested their loyalties. I saw how they hesitated, how envy and fear clouded their judgments. I thought I could hide behind their flaws. Porritt tapped his cane lightly. But you underestimated the power of observation. The smallest clue, a spot of wax, a smudge of chalk can unravel the grandest scheme. He slipped the letter opener into a small pouch. You will be held here until the police arrive to take you away. Meanwhile, I needed this confession, for closure for Adelaide's sake and for those whose trust you betrayed. Bramwell rose, shoulders slumping beneath the weight of guilt. He offered a trembling nod. Thank you, Monsieur Porritt. I regret it all. Porritt placed a steady hand on Bramwell's shoulder. Regret cannot resurrect the lost, yet it may guide you toward understanding the consequences of your actions. He stepped back, signaling the end of the confrontation as Bramwell was led away, his steps heavy but resolute. Porritt turned to me. The lamp's glow softened upon his composed face. Hastings, the murderer's last confession, is like an epitaph. It marks the final chapter in a life complicated by greed and fear. Tomorrow, We shall gather the company one final time to deliver justice and restore order. I nodded. Though the gravity of the confession weighed upon me, the theatre's corridors, once echoing with suspicion, would soon reverberate with truth, and Poirot's masterful confrontation had cut through every illusion, laying bare the darkest corner of the human heart. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape the hush of midnight draped over the green velvet theatre. Like a funeral shroud, rain pattered steadily on the skylights as Inspector Mallory escorted Bramwell from the holding room toward the stage door, where the yard's patrol awaited. Poirot and I followed at a respectful distance, confident that the night's horrors were concluded. Yet fate, it seemed, had one more twist in store. As Bramwell reached the foot of the grand staircase, a sudden clatter echoed behind us. The inspector spun, hand on his revolver, but the patrol had vanished, drawn momentarily by a false alarm at the stage door's main entrance. In the chaos, Bramwell lunged at Mallory, wrenching free one wrist from its handcuff. The other cuff remained secured to his belt loop, but it afforded him just enough freedom to bolt after him. Mallory shouted, "Poirot," and I sprang into action. Bramwell darted through the foyer, his broad shoulders hunched with desperation. I pursued, darting past overturned chairs and scattered programs, my heart pounding like a timpani. Poirot, with uncanny poise, strode along the opposite wall, intercepting Bramwell's likely course. "Hastings, the back stairs," he called. "He will seek the sub-basement he knows so well." I veered down the shadowed corridor leading to the stage door's alcove. Bramwell's heavy boots thundered ahead, muffled by the carpet. As I rounded a corner, I glimpsed him slipping through the concealed door into the narrow stairwell. I followed, stumbling as the steps turned beneath me. The passage was choked with the smell of damp wood and old stage smoke. Bramwell's silhouette bobbed ahead, illuminated by a lone emergency lamp. He paused at the bottom, fishing in his coat for something. A flash of metal caught my eye. Key fragment he had pried from Mallory's chain during the struggle. "No," I cried. Racing down the stairs, Bramwell jammed the fragment into the lock of the hatch leading beneath the stage. The hatch creaked open. He slipped through, dropping the fragment inside and slamming it shut. I reached the hatch too late. The lock clicked, sealing him within the sub-basement. I banged against the wooden panel. Inspector Mallory. He's escaped into the prop cellars. Moments later, Mallory's flashlight beam cut through the gloom. He joined me at the hatch. Blast. "It," he muttered, jiggling the latch. It held fast. "We need to find another way in." Poirot emerged behind us, face pale but eyes alight. "There is a ventilation shaft at the far end of the cellar large enough to admit a man of Bramwell's girth. He will head there." He pointed. "Come, Hastings." We navigated the labyrinth of crates and stands, careful not to knock over the heavy scenery. Percy Dunn's abandoned toolbox lay open on a workbench, wrenches and screwdrivers scattered across the floor. I stooped to gather them, recalling Percy's trembling admission that he once considered using the tools to muffle a scream. Now they might serve a nobler purpose. Poirot and I pressed on until we reached the ventilation shaft, a rectangular aperture, its grill loose from years of disuse. Bramwell crouched within. Halfway through the opening, he glared at us. "Wild double quotes stop. Bramwell." I called, brandishing a wrench, but he thrust himself onward, disappearing into the darkness. Poirot stepped forward, voice calm. "Monsieur, desist. You are cornered. There is no escape." From the shaft came a faint scrape, metal on metal. A moment later, Bramwell's arm extended, brandishing the silver letter opener. He slashed downward, aiming for the handcuff still attached to his belt loop. The blade nicked Poirot's sleeve. Insolent, Poirot exclaimed, leaning aside. He tapped the floor thrice with his cane. Suddenly, Mallory lunged forward, wrench in hand, and knocked the blade from Bramwell's grasp. It clattered across the floor, Bramwell's lips cold in a grim smile. "I'd rather die than face them." He drew himself to full height. FISTS clenched. Poirot approached, unafraid. "Monsieur, what has happened to you? Once a man of honor, now reduced to this desperation." He motioned to the open cellar hatch. "Seize him. Inspector." Mallory and I closed in from either side. Bramwell fought back, but his strength was sapped by exhaustion and fear. I tackled him, pressing him to the ground, while Mallory snapped the spare handcuff found in his pocket Tonto Bramwell's other wrist. With Bramwell subdued, Poirot picked up the blade and the key fragment from the hatch. He sought to destroy evidence and flee in darkness, he observed, yet small items betrayed every step. The metal fragment from the lock and the letter opener's nick upon my sleeve. I marveled at Poirot's attention to detail. Without the fragment, we might never have known which hatch he used. He nodded, and without the blade, we might have doubted his desperation. Both objects marked the desperate heart. Just then, a distant rumble announced the arrival of the station patrol. Mallory secured Bramwell firmly and called them up. As the officers ascended the stairs, Bramwell cast a sorrowful glance upward, as though bidding farewell to the theatre he once loved. Poirot brushed off his sleeve and turned to me. "Hastings, our desperate attempt at escape has only strengthened our case. Now that Bramwell has tried to flee and destroy evidence, we shall proceed to the final gathering. In that assembly, we will restore order and deliver justice fully." I exhaled, relief mingled with exhaustion. The night's tensions had reached a fever pitch, but under Poirot's composed guidance, the murderer's final act had only confirmed his guilt. As the patrolling officers dragged Bramwell away, the Green Velvet Theatre settled once more into restless quiet, awaiting the denouement that would close its darkest chapter. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into Placide hours late when Poirot returned alone to the grand foyer, his steps echoing softly against the marble floor. The stagehands had retired for the night, and the scattered chairs and overturned props bore silent witness to the day's chaos. Yet one actor remained upon the stage of truth, Monsieur Hercule Poirot himself determined to uncover the last fragment of mystery that would complete his intricate puzzle. He paused before the bronze statuette, the dancer poised on one foot, plinth of burnished brass glinting beneath the chandelier's dying light. Earlier, the statuette had revealed to him the wax imprint and the scorch marks that had unmasked Bramwell's clandestine approach. But Poirot sensed another secret lurking in its space. Drawing forth the small key fragment rescued from Bramwell's escape attempt, Poirot knelt to examine the statuette's plinth. He noted, just beneath the central medallion, a nearly imperceptible seam. With deft fingers, he inserted the fragment into a tiny slot and applied gentle pressure. The plinth tilted forward, revealing a hidden cavity. Inside lay a slender leather roll tied with a faded ribbon. Poirot drew it out with ceremonious care and undid the ribbon. The parchment within was a page torn from Miss Winterbourne's private journal. He unrolled it and read by the amber glow of his pocket lamp. April 11th. I have discovered irregularities in the ledgers. Monsieur Bramwell's accounts show diversions of funds meant for repairs. He believes I do not know. Tonight, I must confront him. Either he restores the sums or I expose his betrayal. My hand trembles, but justice demands it. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he studied the passage. Mon Dieu, he murmured. A confession of intended confrontation. This was your true motive, Adelaide. Not mere fear of exposure, but a calculated threat to a man consumed by avarice. He carefully refolded the journal page and placed it within his waistcoat pocket. This final piece, Adelaide's written promise to confront Bramwell, completed the tapestry of motive and opportunity. Bramwell had panicked upon learning of her discovery and decided that silencing her was the only solution, with the journal page secured. Poirot ascended the grand staircase to the green velvet lounge, where the remaining cast and crew had gathered under Inspector Mallory's supervision. Their faces, lit by the glow of a single lantern, reflected equal parts exhaustion and anticipation. Poirot entered, offering a graceful nod. The group fell silent at his presence. He approached the small table at the room's center and drew forth the parchment. Msamus, he began, voice calm and steady. We have followed many trails. Footprints masked in darkness, poisoned tea, stolen letters, a hidden alcove, and a desperate escape. Yet until now, we lacked the document that sealed the murderer's fate. He held the journal page aloft. Miss Winterbourne discovered Monsieur Bramwell's embezzlement and vowed to confront him. This page, hidden within the statuette's plinth, bears her solemn words. It is the final piece of evidence, her own declaration of intent, written in ink more indelible than blood. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Beatrice Marlowe stepped forward. Hand clasped to her throat, she meant to meet him. Here, she whispered. Exactly. Poirot replied. She did not invite any of you to this confrontation. It was purely between her and Bramwell. He anticipated her arrival and prepared his scheme, the candle to cloak his movements, the hidden thread to misdirect us, and the stolen letters to conceal his guilt. But he overlooked the statuette's secret. Clara York's eyes brimmed with tears. We all feared being implicated, but she feared him more. Poirot inclined his head. Miss Winterbourne, in her courage, placed her trust in justice. She did not know that betrayal had a darker face than envy, and so she placed her words where only her murderer would find them, too late for her, but not too late for the truth. He turned to Inspector Mallory. Monsieur l'Inspecteur, this document completes the case. Monsieur Bramwell confessed it now. Armed with this page, we understand the full depth of his motive. His crime was premeditated, fueled by greed and fear of exposure. Mallory snapped his notebook shut. Very good, Poirot. I will see that this page is logged into the evidence. Poirot folded his hands, surveying the assembled group. Msamus, we have witnessed the many facets of human failings: envy, resentment, loyalty, and deception. But above all, we must remember Miss Winterbourne's bravery in seeking justice. It is my honor to present her final testament to you, the final piece that falls into place to reveal the whole tragedy. He stepped back, allowing silence to wash over the room. Then, with serene authority, he pronounced, tomorrow evening, at the final gathering, we shall reconstruct the events in full, but tonight, let us reflect on the fragile balance of trust and the might of a single written word to illuminate the darkest deed. As the suspects exchanged solemn glances, Poirot tucked the journal page safely away. In the hush that followed, I realized that every thread, physical and emotional, had now been woven into a coherent tapestry. The mystery was complete, save for the denouement that would reunite all upon the theatre's grand stage. And so, with hearts heavy yet minds clear, we departed the lounge, each of us carrying the weight of truth revealed, ready for the final act when justice would ascend the footlights one last time. Chapter 15. The final gathering. The night of the final gathering arrived with a restless wind rattling the green velvet. The Ada's windows, inside, the grand auditorium, lay empty, its scarlet seats awaiting an audience of one, the company of players whose secrets had been laid bare. Poirot had insisted the assembly take place here, beneath the proscenium arch where truth would at last claim its stage. I followed him onto the bare stage, where he arranged a long oak table and placed each key object in deliberate order. the statuette, the single glove, the hairpin, the tarnished candlestick base, the poisoned teacup, and at the center of framed parchment bearing Adelaide Winterbourne's final journal page, behind us. A single spotlight illuminated the tableau, leaving the rest of the auditorium in shadow. Poirot surveyed the scene with satisfaction. Hastings, our theatre of deceit, is ready for its curtain call. Permit me now to convene the company. He stepped to stage left and raised his hand. Moments later, the 8 remaining individuals filed onto the stage, their steps tentative. Lionel Ashcroft, resplendent in his evening coat, led the procession, followed by Beatrice Marlowe, Clara York, Agnes Whitfield, Percy Dunn, Miss Larkin, and Beatrice's assistant, Madame Colette, whose pallor spoke of lingering shock. Each took a place round the table. Eyes fixed upon Poirot, the inspector stood to one side. Maintaining polite distance, Poirot cleared his throat, his silhouette striking against the darkened house. "Mzamas, I thank you for returning this evening to the site of our first apparition, to the very stage upon which Miss Winterbourne once shone. Tonight, we reconstruct the crime in all its parts. I shall recount events, present the evidence, and allow you to witness the immutable logic that leads us to justice." With a graceful motion, he began. We start with the statuette. He placed the bronze dancer before Lionel. "Monsieur Ashcroft, you first discovered this statuette in the foyer's recess. Its plinth served as the resting place for the candle that masked the murderer's approach. Observe the imprint in the wax and recall the scorch upon the floor." He tapped the statuette. From here, the assailant crouched, blowing out the flame at exactly 6:50. Cloaking the corridor in darkness, he moved to the candlestick base. This space, found backstage, matches the wax's concentric rings. Only one person had intimate knowledge of every hidden alcove and secret stairwell, the stagehand, Monsieur Bramwell. Yet that alone would not suffice to prove guilt without motive. Poirot turned to the single glove and hairpin. These personal items were planted as diversions. The glove, trimmed in lace, belonged to one of the chorus girls, the silver hairpin to Miss Larkin. Both were dropped to implicate the innocent. He held each up in turn. Yet the shattered note directed the murderer to the green velvet lounge, an impromptu hiding place for stolen letters. He retrieved the torn cryptic note and unfolded it. This note, torn into 3 jagged strips, led us here. Within the lounge, we found the secret panel and Adelaide's letters stolen to conceal the murderer's dread of exposure. He paused, letting the weight of that discovery settle. Next, he produced the poisoned teacup. "Madame Colette, you fell victim to a diluted dose of cyanide shortly after midday. The poison was meant for Adelaide, but applied to your tea to create chaos and misdirect suspicion. Only someone with access to the duplicate key and the courage of desperation would attempt such a gambit." The company exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot continued, placing the teacup upon the table. "Then came the theft of correspondence letters, revealing embezzlement and the hidden journal page you see before you. Adelaide's written resolve to confront her embezzler that very evening." He pointed to the framed parchment. This final piece was concealed in the statuette's plinth, accessible only to one with both the knowledge of its secret seam and the motive of greed. Here, Adelaide declared her intention to expose Monsieur Bramwell's diversion of funds. Beatrice Marlowe drew a sharp breath. She meant to confront him here, on this very stage. Indeed, Poirot affirmed, and he, fearing ruin, planned her silence. He faced the group squarely. "Mzamas, by combining physical evidence with direct confession, we see a portrait of premeditation, a locked-room murder staged through illusion, misdirection, and poison." He paused, allowing each person to absorb the narrative. Then, with theatrical flourish, he tapped the journal page's frame. Yet I invite you now to hear the final, spoken confession once spoken not to me, but to each of you. He turned to Inspector Mallory. Monsieur l'Inspecteur, Mallory stepped forward and cleared his throat. Earlier this evening, after the escape attempt, Monsieur Bramwell was recaptured in the sub-basement. Under questioning, he provided a full account of his actions. He admitted to embezzling theatre funds, to stealing Adelaide's letters, to attempting to frighten Madame Colette, and finally, to ending Adelaide's life when she threatened to unmask him. He dropped his voice. He showed remorse, citing shame as his driver. Yet the law must now take its course, as silence ensued, broken only by the soft hum of the spotlight. Poirot raised his hand for finality. Mzamas, the evidence stands. Clear, the murder is. He swept his gaze across the assembly. Monsieur Bramwell. Clara York's hand flew to her mouth, tears brimming. Lionel Ashcroft bowed his head. Agnes Whitfield trembled. Miss Larkin closed her eyes. Madame Colette exhaled. Relief mingled with sorrow. Beatrice Marlowe, wounded by grief and guilt, remained still, absorbing the resolution. Poirot offered each a gentle nod. Thank you for your courage in witnessing this denouement. Though the tragedy of Adelaide Winterbourne cannot be undone, justice now honors her memory. He turned to his small companion. Hastings, it is done. I stepped forward and joined Poirot at the table's edge. The evidence lay arranged like actors awaiting curtain call. Poirot tapped his cane softly. In the theatre of life, Mzamas, we must all play our parts with integrity. And when deception takes the lead, it is only truth that may reclaim the stage. With that, the final gathering came to an end. The company filed from the auditorium in silence, each bearing the weight of what had transpired. Poirot and I lingered. The empty seats before us, now symbolic of the lives forever altered by greed and betrayal and of the steadfast little grey cells that had illuminated the path to justice. Chapter 16. The revealed hush fell again across the empty auditorium, its velvet seats now shadows in the dim glow of the footlights. Poirot stood at centre stage, cane in hand, the assembled company having just witnessed the final gathering. Now, one last moment remained, one final unveiling of truth before the night closed its curtain for good. Poirot's gaze swept across the faces illuminated by the single spotlight. Lionel Ashcroft with his thoughtful reserve, Beatrice Marlowe's haunted composure, Clara York's trembling relief, Agnes Whitfield's quiet sorrow, Percy Dunn's solemn regret, Miss Larkin's rueful empathy, and Madame Colette's steadied resolve. Each had played their part, but now the time had come to sate curiosity and deliver the fullest revelation. With a deliberate motion, Poirot stepped to the oak table and lifted the framed journal page bearing Adelaide Winterbourne's final testament. Mzamas, he began, voice clear and steady. We have examined each clue, each testimony, and each misdirection. We have identified Monsieur Bramwell as the murderer. But justice demands that we understand not only who, but how and above all, why. He set the parchment upon the table and drew forth the small diary he had taken from Beatrice's office. Consider this. Adelaide removed certain lines from the script to preserve her author's vision. Yet, beneath her professionalism lay a heart that feared betrayal, not only on stage, but off it. She documented her suspicions in these diary lines you all dismissed as theatrical flourish. He opened the diary to a marked passage and read aloud. Tonight, I fear for more than my reputation. Bramwell's glances linger too long upon the theatre's coffers. He tightens his grip on every account. I will confront him at 6:45, alone in the foyer. If he refuses to rectify his embezzlement, I will reveal all. A murmur swept through the group. Beatrice stepped forward. She wrote that. Porret bowed. His head. Yes, madam. And having discovered such resolve, Bramwell knew that her word held power. So he orchestrated a sequence of events to simulate an impossible crime-locked room murder meant to baffle, so that her warnings would be lost in confusion. He picked up the letter opener. This instrument, stolen from her desk, served both as tool and symbol. After striking the fatal blow, he hid it beneath the chaise lamp, confident that darkness and misdirection would shield him. He motioned to the hairpin and glove. He then staged false clues, these small items to implicate a chorus girl, and the dresser. Capitalizing on your own vulnerabilities, Clara's eyes filled. I should have spoken sooner. Porret offered her a gentle nod. Fear can silence truth, but it also sharpens guilt. Yet it was Bramwell's next move that sealed his downfall. He tapped the statuette. He hid Adelaide's letters and her final diary page here, in the secret compartment. He believed that by concealing evidence, he would direct suspicion elsewhere. But he underestimated human curiosity. He reached for the candlestick base. The wax imprint and scorch mark betrayed his clandestine approach. Only he moved in shadow so confidently. Only he knew the hidden alcove and the staircase. His confidence was his folly. Porret paused to let the significance sink in, then continued. But I want you to understand this was not a crime of rage, nor a momentary lapse. It was premeditated, executed with precision, and cloaked in the theatre's illusions. Bramwell believed his knowledge of the theatre's secrets and your collective hesitations would shield him instead. It wove the web that caught him. He stepped back and swept his arm toward the exit of the stage. Now, let us hear his own words. Turning, Porret called softly, Monsieur Bramwell. Inspector Mallory, waiting in the wings, signaled and ushered Bramwell onto the stage. Hands cuffed but head held high, the company watched in silence as he approached the table and stood before Porret. Porret offered a solemn nod. Monsieur Bramwell, you have admitted your guilt. You have confessed to embezzlement, conspiracy to deceive, and the murder of Adelaide Winterbourne. Yet, further record. Will you speak your motive into the silent air of this theatre? Bramwell's voice came halting but steady. I stood in envy and fear. I built this theatre with my own hands, watched it flourish, and felt pride. Yet the company prospered by her star power, her talent drawing crowds that saved my livelihood. When I misallocated funds for repairs, rationalizing it as temporary, I feared discovery. When Adelaide threatened to expose me, I panicked. I believed that staging an impossible crime would confound you, buying me time. I never meant to kill her, but when she saw the gleam of the missing funds in my account book, her horror sent me into darkness. His chin trembled. I am sorry. I wish I could unsay my deeds. A hush fell. Porret placed a steadying hand on Bramwell's shoulder. Your confession, born upon this stage of truth, seals the tragedy. Yet let this cautionary tale remind us that even the sincerest intentions can twist into ruin when fear governs the heart. Bramwell inclined his head respectfully to the company, then allowed Inspector Mallory to lead him away. The officers reappeared to take him into custody, his footsteps echoing until swallowed by the backstage corridors. Porret turned back to the group, his expression solemn. Samus. The drama is ended. Adelaide's voice, though silenced, now speaks louder than ever through the verdict we have reached. Let us honor her memory by embracing honesty and integrity in all our acts. The company remained silent, absorbing the weight of his words. At last, Lionel Ashcroft stepped forward, voice hushed. Thank you, Monsieur Porret, for guiding us through these dark passages to the light of truth. Porret inclined his head in gratitude. It is the function of the detective to illuminate the shadows. But it is the responsibility of individuals to guard against the shadows within. With that final reflection, the company dispersed, leaving Poirot and me alone on the stage. The footlights dimmed, as though granting a private benediction. Poirot turned to me and offered a serene smile. Mon ami, the heart of this theatre, beats anew, cleansed by revelation, though Adelaide's final act ended in tragedy. Her courage in writing the truth has ensured her legacy endures. I nodded, moved by the journey we had shared, the Green Velvet Theatre, once veiled in suspicion and deception, now stood as a testament to the triumph of little grey cells and the unwavering power of truth. Under the most artful of disguises. Chapter 17. Outcome and just a storm broke over the Green Velvet Theatre with a pale, grey light that seeped through its stained glass windows, painting the corridors in muted hues. The night's revelations had passed, and now the company gathered one final time in the foyer, their expression subdued but resolute. Inspector Mary stood by the entrance, ensuring the orderly departure of each individual for a formal questioning. Poirot and I remained near the grand staircase, observing the culmination of our investigation as the theatre transitioned from crime scene to place of reckoning. First to step forward was Madame Colette, her composure restored yet tempered by recent peril. She approached Poirot with grace. "Monsieur Poirot, I owe you my life and more than I can express. I shall forever be in your debt." She inclined her head, then retreated toward the awaiting carriage, escorted gently by Inspector Mary. Next came Clara York and Agnes Whitfield, the former protégée and the former rival. They walked side by side. Their rivalry melted into a shared sense of relief and regret. Clara turned to Agnes as they paused before the staircase. "I'm sorry for my silence," she whispered. Agnes placed a hand on Clara's arm. "And I for my envy. May we honor Adelaide's memory by supporting one another." They descended together, their reconciliation a silent tribute to the victim whose secrets had appended their lives. Percy Dunn lingered, clutching the toolbox he had abandoned during Bramwell's desperate escape. Poirot approached him. "Monsieur Dunn, you showed courage today. Your quick thinking retrieved the spare cuff and allowed the murderer's flight to end." Percy managed a small smile. "I only did what I hoped was right. Thank you, monsieur." He bowed and followed the others downstairs. Miss Larkin, the earnest dresser whose loyalty had faltered, remained at the foot of the stairs. Poirot addressed her gently. "Mademoiselle Larkin, your intentions were noble, if misguided. Fear can cloud the noblest of hearts." She wiped her eyes. "I only wanted to protect them all." Poirot nodded. "Then learn from this truth is the only true safeguard." She descended, shoulders squared by new resolve. Beatrice Marlowe stood apart, trembling slightly as she faced the detective whose insights had cut through her own denials. She approached with measured steps, voice hushed. "Monsieur Poirot, I am grateful that Adelaide's words and yours have brought clarity. I shall rebuild this company with honesty and respect." Poirot inclined his head. "Your pen wields great power. Madam, use it wisely." She offered a solemn nod before joining the others. Finally, Lionel Ashcroft paused on the landing, gazing upon the empty stage through the open doors. He turned to us, his gaze thoughtful. "This theatre has been both sanctuary and trap. I regret not seeing the sign sooner." Poirot placed a calming hand on Lionel's shoulder. "You have many gifts, mon ami. Let this serve as a lesson that true brilliance shines when tempered by humility." Lionel nodded, then stepped down, the company's final absence marking the end of the cast. Only Poirot and I remained, the echo of departed footsteps gradually fading into silence. Inspector Mary closed the foyer doors and joined us. "All suspects have been processed. Bramwell will stand trial for the murder of Adelaide Winterbourne and the various attempted diversions." The case is airtight, thanks in large part to your meticulous work, Monsieur Poirot. Mallory's admiration was evident in his tone. Poirot's expression was serene. Monsieur l'Inspecteur, it is neither I nor the law that should take pride, but Miss Winterbourne, whose courage too, write the truth ensured that justice could prevail. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Her final act was one of defiance against wrongdoing. Let us honor her by ensuring her story is told accurately, devoid of embellishment. As Mallory departed to oversee the sealing of the evidence room, Poirot guided me toward the silent stage. The footlights stood idle, awaiting a new performance, yet their warmth seemed to linger in the air. Poirot picked up the statuette from its pedestal and placed it tenderly upon the proscenium. "Rail, observe, Hastings," he said softly. "This dancer, forever poised in elegance, now occupies a place of remembrance rather than illusion. The theatre may bustle once more with players and patrons, but Adelaide's spirit will forever inhabit these halls." He stepped back, letting the statuette's significance settle between us. I surveyed the empty seats, recalling the company's myriad reactions, the fear, the envy, the sorrow, the relief. "Do you think they will ever perform the play again, Monsieur Poirot?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "They may, but the performance will never be the same. The memory of Adelaide's tragedy will infuse every line, every gesture. Perhaps that is the truest tribute, to carry her absence onto the stage, transforming sorrow into art." He turned to me, eyes bright, "And as for us, Hastings, our work begins anew elsewhere. For where injustice lurks, the little grey cells must illuminate the path to justice." We descended the stairs together, leaving the silent theatre behind, outside. The morning air was cool and crisp, as though the world itself exhaled after a difficult night. The rain had ceased, and the sun's tentative rays kissed the wet pavement dot as we walked away from the green velvet theatre. Poirot paused to look back at its grand parade. He lifted his hat in a silent farewell. I mirrored the gesture, understanding that though our journey here had concluded, the echoes of this mystery would resonate in both our minds and in the walls of the theatre for years to come. And so, with justice served and secrets unveiled, the curtains finally fell on the dark affair at the Green Velvet Theatre until another call to the little grey cells brought us back to untangle the next web of human folly. Chapter 18. The closing remark. The Green Velvet Theatre, now bathed in warm morning light, stood silent save for the faint rustle of curtain strings. A gentle breeze drifted through the open doors. The echoes of yesterday's tumult had faded into memory, leaving behind a sense of solemn peace. Upon the empty stage, Poirot and I took our leave, pausing one final time beneath the proscenium arch where justice had, at last, reclaimed its throne. Poirot surveyed the vast auditorium, his keen eyes reflecting both satisfaction and poignant reflection. He tapped his cane lightly on the stage floor, the sound resonant in the hush. "Hastings," he began, voice soft yet carrying clearly, "to the farthest balcony. We conclude not merely an investigation, but an examination of the human heart. In our quest for truth, we have journeyed through ambition, envy, fear, and loyalty, each emotion a thread woven into the tapestry of this crime." I nodded, recalling how Adelaide Winterbourne's courage and Bramwell's desperation had intertwined to bring tragedy to this venerable playhouse. "It has been a most intricate performance," I said, "from the hidden alcove to the secret journal. Each clue demanded patience and precision." Poirot smiled, his moustaches twitching. "Indeed. Yet the grandest of these clues was her own voice, her written words calling us to justice from beyond the grave. It reminds us that the smallest act of courage can echo louder than the grandest deception." He turned to the backstage entrance and called softly, Monsieur Bramwell. The distant clang of a jailer's keys answered him, and Bramwell appeared at the edge of the wings, escorted by Inspector Mary. His posture was humble, his face marked by regret rather than anger. Poirot extended a hand in invitation. Bramwell stepped forward and halted beneath the spotlight's glow. Poirot addressed him kindly. "Monsieur, you faced your fear and confessed. Though your crime was grave, your acknowledgment of guilt restores a measure of dignity. May your time hence be guided by reflection and, perhaps, remorse." Bramwell bowed his head. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I cannot undo what I have done, but I shall carry the lessons of this theatre with me always." He allowed Mary to guide him away, vanishing into the shadows as the inspector closed the wings behind him. The hush returned, deeper than before. Poirot's gaze lingered on the spot where the murderer had stood. Then, with deliberate grace, he turned to me. "Hastings, the stage is empty once more, but the truths uncovered here will resonate in every footstep upon these boards. It is my belief that the art of detection shares much with the art of theatre. Both require understanding of human motive and mastery of timing." I followed his gaze to the painted backdrop, its twilight scene now illuminated by the rising sun, and in both, I added, there must be finality and ending that honors the narrative and the audience alike. Poirot inclined his head precisely, and so amidst the actors who remain, the crew who rebuild, and the patrons who return will carry forward this theatre's legacy. They will remember Adelaide not only as a star upon this stage, but as a beacon of integrity whose written warning ensured that darkness could not prevail. He placed a gentle hand upon the velvet curtain. Its rich folds quivered beneath his touch, as though acknowledging the gravity of the moment. The curtain falls on this mystery, but rises on a new chapter, one in which truth, no longer hidden, may guide each player's next performance. We descended the steps to the foyer, where Inspector Mary awaited with a respectful nod. The inspector indicated a small package held in his hand. "Monsieur Poirot, this arrived for you at Don Adelaide's. Final letter, addressed to you personally." He extended the parcel, sealed with black wax bearing her monogram. Poirot accepted it with reverence, breaking the seal and unfolding the heavy stationery. He read silently, his expression a blend of gratitude and wistfulness. At last, he spoke, voice barely above a whisper. She writes, "Dear Monsieur Poirot, though I cannot thank you in person, know that your little grey cells honor the memory of one who prized truth above all. May your eyes remain ever vigilant, for shadows persist even in the brightest halls." He paused and folded the letter carefully. A fitting farewell. We stood together in contemplative silence. Outside, the bustle of stage hands returning to their morning rituals drifted indoors, footsteps on stairways, distant voices discussing set repairs and costume adjustments. Life at the theatre, inexorably, was already resuming its rhythm. Poirot replaced the letter in its envelope and tucked it into his waistcoat pocket. Then, turning to me, he offered his parting thought. "Hastings, each case reminds us that man's mind is fertile ground for both virtue and vice. We must ever esteem the courage to confront wrongdoing and to protect the innocent." He extended his hand in farewell. "Shall we go?" I took his hand, feeling the familiar reassurance of his friendship. "Shall we?" I agreed. Together, we stepped out into the golden morning, leaving the green velvet theatre behind. It's now silent for Wade, and though the echoes of tragedy would linger within its halls, the dawn promised renewal for the company, for the theatre itself, and for all who understood that, in the end, truth is the finest performance of all.